Welcome to Stunt Stories. I'm Corey Eubanks. You know, typically when someone finds out that I'm a professional stuntman, one of the first questions they ask, in addition to what movies have you worked on, is what's the most dangerous stunt you've ever done? Get asked that all the time. And my go-to answer used to be the stunt that I did for John Woo on this BMW films, and it was called The Hostage. It was a BMW film. They did a series of like 6 different films for the internet, these mini movies, if you will. They're very well high produced. Tony Scott directed one. Joe Cardahan directed another. They had some big directors. John Woo, the one I did with him. And what I had to do really wasn't all that difficult. It was more psychological. And what I mean by that is it was throwing this Z4 BMW, a convertible Z4, and it was a prototype. They had not mass produced these vehicles yet. So there was a lot of things on the vehicle that did not work properly or didn't exist, such as the speedometer. It was just a cardboard cutout of what it's going to look like once they manufacture it and install it. So this car was operable, but didn't have certain features that it would have once it hit the showroom floor. And I got called by Greg Smers, who was the stunt coordinator of this BMW movie. And he asked me if I could throw a 270-degree slide up to the edge of a drawbridge. And the conversation was very kind of on the surface, kind of just, hey, just wondering if you could throw a 270. And I go, a 270? He goes, yeah, I need you to throw a 270 up to the edge of a drawbridge. Now, at the time, being honest, I had no clue what a 270 was. I mean, I know what a 180 is. I know what a 360. I have thrown many 360-degree slides, a complete 360 spin in a vehicle. I've thrown a lot of 180s and reverse 180s and a lot of 90s, and a lot of times throwing a 45-degree slide up to a mark to make it look exciting. But I couldn't quite wrap my head around a 270, what that meant. And I said, I guess he kind of read the tone in my voice, because I was like, a 270? And he goes, yeah, a 180 with a reverse 90. And I go, oh, a 270. Oh, yeah, I could do that. Like I knew what it was. So he hires me for this job and got to do a lot of cool stuff. Did a big jump down this hill and down in San Pedro in this convertible. And that was an exciting thing all on its own. But this 270 slide up to the edge of this drawbridge down in San Pedro was more challenging to me because I had just come out of shoulder surgery, had my right bicep reattached and my rotary cuff, operated on and fixed, and they went in there and kind of fixed it up and reattached some of the tendons and shaved some of the bone because I had some bone spurs in there. And that was about maybe 3 or 4 weeks before this job came up. And I did not have full mobility with my right shoulder. But I didn't want to lose out on this opportunity to do this BMW film with John Woo. I had worked with him on Mission Impossible 2. And I thought, what a great guy to work with John Woo. You always learn stuff. He's just a phenomenal director, action director, great storyteller, in my opinion. So I never mentioned anything about my shoulder to Greg Smers. And we get down there to San Pedro, and this drawbridge goes straight up, and so the ships can go underneath it. And I'm looking at this thing, and it's on a cement surface. And it's from the edge of the drawbridge, it's 52 feet to the water below, to the ocean, 52 feet. And in my mind, I'm thinking, this is John Woo. This is like the guy who's on the cutting edge of CGI and green screens and, compositing images. And why aren't we just putting the darn drawbridge down and covering it with a big green screen, and I could slide the 270-degree slide right up to the edge, because that's what he wants, right up to the edge. Clive Owen is the guy who's in this movie who's driving the car. That's who I'm stunt doubling. And I'm thinking, kind of scratching my head, like, why aren't we doing that? Why, this is John Woo. Why isn't he just saying, hey, we'll put cameras here shooting down and cover the drawbridge that we're going to raise. We'll cover that with a green screen, have Corey slide up to the edge. Then we can remove the green screen and lift the drawbridge and shoot a plate shot. Composite them together. There you go. But that was not happening. So, and in addition to that, rather than just doing that one little piece of sliding this BMW up to the edge, he wanted me to weave through all of these cars at first. I say all of these cars. There was probably 3 or 4 that I had to pass and weave through before I'd come in and throw this 270-degree slide up to the edge of this drawbridge. And I remember when Greg asked me if I could do the 270, and when I lied to him and told him that I knew what it was, and he asked me if there was anything special that I needed done to the vehicle. And I said, well, you know what, Greg? I need a really good foot emergency brake system. And because I don't want to have to use a hand pull, a hand brake, because I want to have both hands on the wheel. And I go, I'm going to need a very accurate speedometer. Those are the 2 things that I requested. Want to have a foot emergency brake and a very accurate speedometer. But when the vehicles showed up, they had installed a handbrake on the left-hand side where the foot emergency brake would normally be, forcing me to reach down with my left hand and hold the steering wheel with my bad shoulder, with my right hand, which was, my right hand's connected to my bad shoulder. And it was excruciatingly painful. I have to be honest and say it was just an awkward bending down and tweaking my shoulder that way, having just had shoulder surgery. It was not comfortable. It was painful. And then on top of it, that's when I discovered that this vehicle did not have a speedometer. It just had a tachometer. So I'm like, how am I going to figure this out? Because I'm that guy that says, hey, I'm going to come in at whatever speed I pick. Like maybe it's, 35, maybe it's 40. I'll come in at 40 miles an hour and hit the emergency brake at a very specific mark and see, how much do I travel? How much does the car's speed dissipate as the tires are spinning and figure it out and kind of get an idea. Okay, now I'll go a little bit faster or I'll go a little bit slower until you dial it in. Well, I wasn't able to do that with the drawbridge. So I asked them if I could, on the other side of the bridge, on the opposite side, if they could put the drawbridge down and let me rehearse over there. Because see, they didn't want me to do it where we're going to be shooting the shot, because they would leave all these skid marks there on the cement, and you would see that, oh yeah, he took them several times to get this, and there's all these skid marks, and that's what they told me. We don't want to have you, scar up the cement. So they agreed that I can go on the opposite side, and I said to, I forget the first AD, what his name was. But I also know I told Greg Smurs, I said, Greg, it would really be helpful to me once I do my rehearsals that we could go right away. Once I get the rehearsals, let's go right away. It's kind of like, my analogy is kind of like a basketball player shooting baskets. You're practicing, but if they say, hey, you got to shoot this one basket and make it, like, let me do 3 or 4 practice throws, shoot, from the top of the key or whatever, wherever you want to be to shoot your baskets. And then once you got that feel dialed in, okay, now give me the ball. Let me shoot for the one that counts. You still got that feel. And that's what I wanted to do. And they're like, yep, absolutely. Cameras are all set. Corey, you take your time. You do your rehearsals. And when you're ready, you tell us you're ready. We'll go right away. So I went on the other side and I did probably 6 or 7 rehearsals coming in to find that magical speed and what I was gauging my speed off of were 2 things. The sound of the engine, because I was keeping it in low gear, the RPMs of the motor and watching the tachometer, and also the pillars, the steel pillars of this bridge as I was going past them. You kind of get a sense of speed of how fast you're passing these. So there was a lot of, guesstimating, but it was a feel thing. And also I had laid down these skid marks on the opposite side. I knew approximately where I was the one that worked the best, that I was starting and how long it took me to drift up to the edge of the drawbridge. And so I was using that same marker on the opposite side where we were, let's call it the set, where we were going to film. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go. Let's do this. I'm ready. And I got to be honest with you. I was beyond nervous. I was definitely in the scared zone, very scared, that if I were to overslide and go too far and go off the edge of this bridge, I was going to fall 52 feet into the shark-infested water, knowing my luck, and hit a great white shark right on the head and piss him off. And I was so nervous about that. And Greg Smurs had very, very smart man. He always prepares for, the possibility of what could go wrong. He had an oxygen tank, a scuba diving tank that was in the trunk of the car that had a long regulator hose that came up through the back seat that I could grab. Also, I had alongside me, I had a little 3-minute pony tank, and we installed a grab strap on the passenger floor that my game plan was if I overslid and I knew I'm going off the edge, I would lay down on the seat, grab onto the grab strap on the floor to hold me down below the dash with hopes that if the car landed, it wouldn't kill me because I'd be below the dash. That was the only thing I could think of that we were going to do. And also, Greg had these Navy SEALs. They were on these rubber rafts down in the water. And I remember he came to me just before I went, and he said, he kind of runs up to the car and he says, Corey, just so you know, it'll only take 90 seconds. And I said, 90, what's going to take 90 seconds? He goes, to get you out of the water. It's these guys, we got it dialed in. We've got ropes. We know it take us at the most 90 seconds. And I'm like, wow, I'm kind of that guy that the glass is half full, not half empty. I'm like, you've already got me going off the edge in your mind, and you guys are going to have to rescue or retrieve the body out of the ocean. And I'm like, I didn't even want to think about that. So I'm like, oh, okay, great, Greg. That's a great thought for me to carry back to the number 1 when I get ready to go. So I drive the car to the number 1 starting position, and I'm nervous as can be, and I'm not wanting to lose that feel, and I want to go right away. Well, to put the drawbridge up, it was very, very slow, and it made this eerie buzzer, warning sound that the thing was being raised, and would just kind of echoing, across down there in San Pedro. And it was just like horrible sounding. It was spooky. And it took, I don't know, 45 seconds, maybe longer for this bridge to raise. All of that time, that feeling that I had, that sense of timing was fading. It was fading from me. And I'm like, I don't even remember what the engine RPM sounded. I know it was just above 3,700 RPMs, but in first gear. But anyway, I just had these weird, bad vibes going, through my mind. So next thing I know, they're like, we're rolling cameras, and I'm listening to my walkie-talkie that I carry with me, and they call action, and I take off, and I weave through those 3 or 4 cars. And there was this, also I meant to mention, there's this little gate, this balsa wood gate, this arm that comes down that's supposed to stop you from, like at a railroad track crossing. And they wanted me to bust through that and then start the 270 slide. So I come racing down there, and there's that arm in front of me, and I bust through it, and I reach down with my left hand, and I pull that emergency brake to lock up the tires. I crank the wheel, and it spins the 180, and I crank back the other direction, and it comes to a 90, comes to a stop. And I'm like 15 feet from the edge. I'm not even close. And I remember, they call cut, all the cameras, and I look over at the little video village where Greg Smurs was with John Woo, and, Greg kind of starts walking towards me and throws his hands in the air, kind of like, what was that? I'm like, well, what's wrong? He goes, we need you closer to the edge. I go, well, I know. I mean, that was my kind of my rehearsal, if you will. I mean, now, I know you want me closer. And he's like, what's the matter? I go, well, I think it's pretty obvious what's the matter. I go, I'm scared. I'm a little scared. I'll get closer next time. So, but what I had actually done is I'd laid down my skid marks. I laid down my cheat marks. Now I knew at that speed where I started my initial slide and how far it carried me. And my game plan was now for take 2, I'll just go a little bit further beyond that. So here we go for take 2. I get back to number 1. I don't have to wait for the drawbridge to raise because it's already up. I got that sense of timing. It feels better. They call action. I come weaving through the cars. I bust through the breakaway gate arm, and go a little bit past, maybe a car length and a half further past where I initiated my initial slide on take 1. And I do the same exact thing. And I spin the 270 and come to a stop. And I'm much, much closer to the edge, like maybe within 6 feet. And from the camera angles, it looks like I'm right on the edge, and they're contemplating whether they want to do it again. They're like trying to make a decision, like, I think we got it. That looks really close. But from the higher angle, it kind of reveals that he's not right on the edge. And I get that, what you hate to hear sometimes as a stuntman, hey, how do you feel about going one more time? And I'm like, oh, F word. I just wanted to say, nope, don't want to. Because that's what I was feeling, I didn't want to. And I was like, yeah, sure, absolutely. Let's do this till we get it right. Just what you guys want. So I go back to number 1 again. This is for take 3. And as I was driving back to number 1, I'm looking down at my skid marks now. And I'm like, okay, Corey, just go a little tiny bit further on the second set of skid marks. Same speed. You got this. I get the number 1. I'm waiting. They waited a little bit longer this time too, because they were still discussing something about possibly moving a camera. And I remember picking up my walkie-talkie, and I said, guys, I'm losing that feeling. We got to go. And they're like, okay, let's roll cameras. And they call action, and I take off. Now this time I weave through the first few cars. And when I start to bust through that balsa wood arm, that gate arm, and start to pitch the vehicle, I'm not hearing the same screechy sound from the tires on the cement. It was a different sound. It was more of a shh. It wasn't a the sound of rubber on cement. It was more like a sliding sound. And I thought to myself, oh my God, the tires are on the breakaway balsa wood. Somehow when I hit it and the balsa wood fell and got punched out in front of me, I then got on the balsa wood, and I'm going to overslide. And I remember glancing at the edge of that drawbridge and thinking, I am really closer than I was before. And I'm like, oh my God. And I'm pulling on the e-brake and I'm cranking the wheel, down on the left. And then as it came around, and at that point, your back is to where the edge of the drawbridge is. You can't see it. So you have no reference to how close you are, which was just terrifying. I don't know if I'm like going to go right off the edge or where I am. And I crank the wheel back down on my right to spin that reverse 90, and it comes screeching to a stop. And I look to my left, and I can't even see the edge of the drawbridge. I'm that close. I'm like right on the edge. And I'm thinking to myself, this is so stupid for me to do this. This is ridiculous. And I remember I reached down and I turned off the engine. My right shoulder was just throbbing. As I mentioned, I just had the shoulder surgery. And I was kind of mad at myself actually for doing it. And I was going to jump out and say, you know what? I'm done with this. You need to get somebody else because this is just beyond stupid. That was my attitude. I was done. I wasn't going to do it again. And as I turned to get out of the vehicle, I climbed out the passenger side because if I opened up the driver's side door, I was going to fall into the ocean. And I saw everybody at Video Village, and they were throwing their arms in the air and they were clapping, and I'm getting thumbs up from John Woo, and Greg Smurs came over and gave me a big hug, and I'm like, oh, wow, you guys liked it? He's like, oh, it was perfect, Corey, it's perfect. I'm like, you sure you don't want to go again? I could go again if you want. Like trying to convince them that I wasn't scared. But that was beyond scary for me. That was because you're not just sliding a car up to a bunch of orange cones. You're not sliding the car up to a chalk mark on the ground. You're sliding a vehicle up to the edge that if you overshoot your mark, it could be fatal. I don't know. You would have to tell me what would happen to you if you went off a 52-foot-high drawbridge in a convertible vehicle and splashed into the ocean. Would you swim away from that? Would you be fine? I don't know, but it was terrifying, and I used to consider that the most dangerous stunt that I had ever done in the film business, until I cannon rolled a 42,000-pound prison bus 3.5 times at 60 miles per hour in the film Fast Five, and that became my go-to story when people would say, what's the most dangerous stunt you've ever done? And this stunt that I'm going to tell you about, there's a lot of it that nobody knows. There's a lot of it that even Universal Studios that was producing the film Fast Five, they're completely oblivious to. They don't know. So you're kind of getting the inside scoop of what really happened on the making of that movie. And I'd got to tell you that when I was many, many years ago, I had finished working on the TV show Fall Guy, and I had done a pipe ramp, and I'd flipped over this vehicle numerous times, and I was all charged up on adrenaline and feeling great about myself as I'm driving home. And I remember I was following a prison bus that was going to Lompoc. And I thought to myself, wow, how cool it would be to someday flip over a prison bus like that. That would be so awesome and intense. And that'd be the biggest vehicular stunt ever. That was probably, oh my gosh, 1989, 88, 89 that I had that thought. And now, many, many years later, I get this call from Mike Gunther, who was the stunt coordinator on Fast Five, and asking me if I could flip over a prison bus. And I said, hell yeah, yes, that's actually on my bucket list. That's something I've always wanted to do. And he says, okay, great, you're the guy. So now it was a matter of figuring out how we were going to do it and working with Matt Sweeney. And Matt Sweeney is just a genius when it comes to fabrication and special effects and pyrotechnics. And he and his crew, to figure out how to build this roll cage, I would go to his shop every other day to watch the progress of this construction of this roll cage. And the cannon poles that they put in, that was what we're going to use, what's called a cannon. Best analogy would be if you had a .357 revolver and you put a bullet in it, the bullet would be the cannon. And if you put the barrel of the gun to the asphalt and you fired it, all of that energy is going to thrust that bullet into the asphalt, but the pushback is going to flip that gun out of your hand. It's going to flip it up through the air. And that gun represents what the vehicle would be. The bullet is the cannon. But instead of using gunpowder like we used to do back in the 80s, early 80s, late 80s, we used to actually use gunpowder in the cannons. They now use nitrogen. They're using it's air, it's compressed air in these cannons. And the bullet, if you will, the cannon pole, are 7 feet long. They're 10 inches wide, 10 inches in diameter. And there's going to be 3 of them attached to this bus. And the bus, being a unibody, it didn't have a frame for them to securely secure these 7-foot poles. So they had to build a double-decker frame, which added more than 14,000 pounds of steel to the bus itself. And by the time and it took 3 or 4 weeks to build the double-decker frame to secure these 7-foot long, 10-inch wide cannon poles and store all the pressure tanks, all the lines, everything. It took almost 4 weeks. And we also moved the steering wheel, the gas, the brake, everything for me to operate the vehicle. We moved it into the center aisle of the bus and then 7 feet back from the nose of the bus. So I'm like right in the center. And they built this pod around me. And it was really a work of art, the way these fabricators, Mike Duenas and all the guys that were welding and bending that tubing and welding it together, it was beautiful. And yet still the question that we all had was, is it going to be strong enough? Because you see, we've added so much weight to the vehicle. It actually tipped the scales at 42,000 pounds. So that's 21 tons. And we know that, 21 tons, if you're going to be driving, and I knew I was going to be going 60 miles per hour. That was the speed that I chose, that I wanted to go, because I'm a firm believer that in some situations with flipping vehicles or jumping vehicles, that speed can be your friend. That's why they land airplanes at such a high speed. It's kind of a skipping motion. It's a disbursement of energy. I don't want to just have it just flip up in the air and just flop to the ground. I wanted it to skip like a stone down the street. I wanted to have some inertia behind it and some speed. So, and Matt Sweeney agreed with me on that. And so, we were preparing for this vehicle to be going 60 miles an hour, to be flipped up in the air at least 7 feet. But what's that impact going to be? What's that impact if you take a mass of weight that's 21 tons and you send it down the road at 60 miles an hour and then flip it into the air 7 feet? When it comes down and hits the ground, what's that impact going to be? And there was really no way for us to figure that out. So it was always kind of the major fear in all of our minds is this cage going to withstand that impact? The other thing that we did was we converted this switch on the floor on the left-hand side that when I stomped on it, that was going to lock up the back tires so that I could then spin the bus. And I don't know if you've ever driven a bus before, but on these big prison buses, the steering wheel from lock to lock, meaning if you crank the steering wheel all the way down on the left until those wheels lock to the left, to spin it all the way to the right would be 6 revolutions. Now, I didn't have to do that big of a turn, but what I did have to do was weave between 2 vehicles. The Dodge Charger that in the story Paul Walker's character was driving, and there was another vehicle I had to go around and then weave in back in behind the Dodge Charger and then pitch this bus sideways to about a 40-degree angle before I would activate the cannons. So when you're strapped in your stunt seat and your shoulders are pinned back, you don't have that much mobility. You don't have that much time to move that steering wheel, to make that quick maneuver. It's not a go-kart. It's a bus, and it doesn't move and respond very quickly. So we put a 4-to-1 quick steer system on this bus, which made it handle like a go-kart, which made it very, very difficult to drive just to hold it straight. I remember when I first did my very first test run, just to see about how, getting it up to speed, just to get at the location, to get up to 60 miles an hour. And just the slightest little movement with that steering wheel would turn those front tires so radically that it felt like I could have just made a little, like a 4-inch move, and it would have flopped that bus over on its side. And it felt so heavy. It felt like it wiggled, like I was driving a big, huge slab of Jello. It had this wiggle kind of top heavy feel that was like very intimidating, actually. And I was like, wow, I've never felt this before. So in addition to having that pedal on the left that's going to lock up the rear tires, and in addition to having the 4-to-1 quick steer, I have another switch on the floor that is behind the accelerator. So if my foot's on the accelerator, where my heel would be, about 6 inches behind my heel, is another switch on a plate, underneath a plate, this 4x6 plate that has a compression spring that I have to stomp on it with my heel. That's going to actually fire the cannons. That's what's going to fire those 3 cannons that each have 50,000 PSI. So altogether, there's over 150,000 pounds of thrust that's going to flip this bus. And they're all tied in together to that one switch. So what my job is to drive this bus up to 60 miles an hour, get to a specific mark down where that charger is parked in the street, start to slide the bus to about a 35 or 40 degree angle by hitting that switch with my left foot, and just before impact, hit with my right foot, hit the cannon button to flip the bus over the top of this charger. That's the game plan. Now, added to that, they put 2 cameras interior of the bus for various angles. And the camera guys came in and put 2 switches on my left. I remember sitting in the seat. They wanted, hey, where do you want these camera switches? I'm like, oh, great, something else for me to have to worry about. And I said, so I got strapped in, put my helmet on, and I was in my driving position, and my peripheral vision is limited because I have a wraparound on my helmet, so I don't get whiplash, and my head doesn't get snapped side to side. It's very, very tight, actually. I have to sometimes get assistance from someone to pound my helmet back in between my head seat, my helmet support, because it's so tight. So just off to the side, I pointed, I said, right here with my left hand, I'm pointing right there. You could put the 2 switches for your cameras and give me, 2 red lights so I know that they're on. Well, I don't know what happened to those instructions, because that's not where the guy put the camera switches. And later on in this story, I will tell you, it was very frustrating to me. But we get ready to go. Now it's time to do the stunt. And I got to tell you, it was that day that I showed up for work. It was an odd day. It was cold. It was very ominous. It was kind of partially cloudy. And I had a weird vibe from almost everybody on the set. The other stunt performers, the crew members, it was almost like nobody wanted to be seen with me or hang out with me, or, you kind of had that whole dead man walking feel, like no one wants to be seen with me. And it was odd. It was weird. I remember that morning too, before I actually left the Marriott Hotel, I had stayed out there in Valencia, and it was weird. I got up. I knew I was going to be filming out there for a couple of days. But I got up in the morning and I started packing all of my clothes. I picked up all my dirty socks and t-shirt and started putting everything in my travel bag. And when I was getting my stuff out of the bathroom, I stopped and said, wait a minute, why am I packing everything? I know I'm going to be here in this hotel room for at least another 2 nights. And I sat on the bed and I realized that I really didn't think I was going to be coming back to the hotel. I thought to myself, I'm either going to be going to the hospital or possibly to the morgue. And I didn't want somebody coming into my hotel room and picking up my dirty socks and all my personal belongings. So I was going to make it convenient for them. It was also the very first time in my career I've ever gone through and dug up my life insurance policy and took that to my oldest daughter, Tyler, and gave her my life insurance policy and said, you need to hang on to this, because I didn't know, honestly, if I was going to be coming home. And it was a long drive from that hotel out to the location. And then to find out that morning, that cold, kind of foggy morning, that, that I was being not treated that way, but just picking up that vibe from everybody on the set. Like, it was just weird. It was very unsettling. And so I just moved forward with what my job was as a professional stuntman. I was there to do this stunt that I said I could do. I was beyond scared. I'm not too proud or too macho to say that. I was terrified. And it comes time. They had 13 cameras set. They have a helicopter that they're going to shoot from and capture that angle. And everyone's ready. Now it's just time for me to get in and get strapped in, and they got to air up these cannons. And so I get into the vehicle, and I have these ear monitors. They were called Ultimate Ears, and they were custom made for my ear. They put a clay in your ear to form it, and then they send them off and put these monitors, so you can hear everything. They're just really great, and they plug right into the walkie-talkie, and these were custom for me. I've had them for years, and they wouldn't work. I plugged it into my walkie-talkie, and I went to do a radio check, and because on my chest I have a button that I can push to activate the microphone, and my microphone is inside my helmet, and then the ear monitors are my speakers, and I couldn't hear myself. And the PA, the production assistant who had handed me that walkie-talkie that morning, was standing near the open door of the bus. And I got angry. I thought he had handed me a walkie-talkie that was dead. And I snapped at him and I said, "Hey," and I took the walkie and I kind of threw it toward him, like, "Catch this." I said, "Don't ever give me a walkie-talkie that's dead. Give me one that's fully charged." And he ran off to go get me another walkie-talkie. And then he came back and told me that this walkie-talkie was fully charged. He was positive. And I took it and I plugged it in and did another check, radio check, nothing. And I said, "Hold on a second." I said, "I may owe you an apology." I said, "It might not be the walkie-talkie." And I undid it. And I said, "I need some other ear monitors." So I had to take my helmet off, my neck collar, my helmet, took out my ultimate ears, and I got a pair from Mike Gunther. I think they're his own personal. And that's bugging me right now. I'm really bothered that my ear monitors are not working. I got to use somebody else's, and I want all of my equipment. I'm kind of superstitious about things like that. And I put these other ear monitors in, and I plug it into the walkie-talkie, and of course it works. So I knew it was my ear monitors that had gone bad. And I'm like, oh, okay, well, maybe that's the only bad thing that's going to happen today, and we got it out of the way. Good. So I get strapped in. Oh, and by the way, I did apologize to the guy. I remember saying, "Hey, I'm so sorry. I'm just a little stressed right now." He's like, "Dude, don't worry about it. It's all good. It's all good." Because I believe in that. You want to treat others as you want them to treat you. And if you snap at somebody and they didn't deserve it, then they do deserve an apology. And I gave it to them. And so I get strapped in, and they're now going to air up the first cannon. And the air tanks have these air lines that are about 30 or 40 feet long. So they're 30 or 40 feet away from the vehicle that they're charging up, which you think, why are you guys so far away? Are you not confident in your craftsmanship that maybe something's going to go wrong? So these thoughts run through your head, right? So you're sitting there completely strapped in as tight as you're going to be, just in case one of the cannons accidentally fires. That has happened numerous times in the industry, in the stunt industry. Cannons have gone off prematurely numerous times, and a few times people have been seriously hurt. I don't know if there's really been any fatalities, but I know a couple of guys have been crushed by the vehicle flipping over to some crew members standing alongside it. So I get strapped in as tight as I can get, give them the thumbs up. They start airing up the first tank. And the first tank that's going to supply the air to the first cannon, they get that fully charged. They go to do, and that takes like 20 minutes to air it up. They were putting in that much pressure. It took a long time, and you're sitting there just trying to have happy thoughts and not stress over what you're doing and try to stay focused. And that's when I looked down and saw that those camera switches were not where I asked them to be. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I can't even see. And I had to reach down and feel them. And also because they, in those two cameras, they were running IMO cameras. They were actually running film, not digital. They were running little 90-foot mags that had film, 35 millimeter film stock. And they would run out if you turn them on too soon. So they had put two cones, orange cones, about 200 yards down the road on my left-hand side. And we had discussed that once I would pass those two orange cones, that's when I would reach down with my left hand and flick on the two cameras. So I'm trying to remember that. Oh yeah, that's right. I got to do that now. I got to do the camera assistant's job. I'm like, geez, remote. Can't you do this by remote? But anyway, so now they move on to the second cannon and they start to air it up. I'm very relaxed now, and I'm thinking positively, I believe in psycho-cybernetics and the power of visualization and envisioning me going down there and everything I'm going to do to make this a successful stunt. And as I'm sitting there and they're airing up the tank, all of a sudden, that second cannon fires and shoves that pole into the ground and lifts this bus about 3 feet up off the ground. And then it settles back down. And I'm hearing everybody in these ear monitors that are not mine, that belong to Mike Gunther, and they're like, get away from the bus, everybody get back, get away. And I'm like, holy smokes, what just happened? Well, what had happened is they had used these tie downs to hold the pole up inside of the cannon, that 7-foot pole that's going to come out like the bullet. But it was, the valve was leaking air. So as they were filling up the air tank, it was also filling up the cannon, creating pressure. And it got to about 3,000, 4,000 PSI. And that was enough to snap those zip ties and shove the pole into the ground to lift the bus. So I actually had to get out of the vehicle for them to make that correction, to fix what had gone wrong. Because that one particular ball valve that was going to roll open to let all the air from the tank flow through the 2-inch line to go into the cannon was cracked open a little bit. Because you see, they have a ball valve that has an arm that extends off about 10 to 12 inches. And from there, they have a ring that they run bungee cord through, and they pull it very, very tightly to another tie-off point. Usually it's to another piece of the roll cage. And that is what is going to pull the ball valve open to allow all the air to flow through into the cannon. But there are these cables that are keeping that ball valve from rolling open. And when I hit my button on the floor behind my accelerator, the one that I hit with my right heel to activate the cannons, that actually activates 3 cable cutters simultaneously, like little guillotines that are just through gunpowder charge are going to just cut these 3 cables in half simultaneously. Just bam, and it cuts them all at the same exact time, which then allows the bungee cord to pull on that extended arm to roll the ball valve open to let all the air flow through. Well, that one ball valve was already being pulled open a little bit too much by the bungee cord, because the cable connection they had had a little bit too much slack in it. Anyway, they figured that out and they fixed it. So now I'm back in the bus, strapped in. They had the first cannon aired up. Now they air up the second cannon. Yep, we're good. They move on to the third cannon. we finally get everything aired up. They're all ready to go, and they're giving me the thumbs up. Corey, we're ready to go. And I look down, and my air pressure from my air brakes is like it's 65 PSI. Now, they had to be at least 120 for me to release the air brakes. And it wasn't climbing. And then the engine had been running long enough that air pressure should be climbing. And so I was on my walkie saying, wait, guys, I don't have enough air pressure to release the brakes. I can't get the brakes off. And they were saying, well, rev it, just rev the engine, keep revving the engine. So I'm revving this engine to try to, get more RPM so it could, and it's moving the needle. It's slowly moving the needle up. And they're like already rolling these 13 cameras and the helicopters hovering outside my window to follow me in, and I'm revving the engine up. Well, directly in front of me is this thing called the edge arm. That's this vehicle that has this crane arm on top of it. And the gentleman driving that is in the cab with 3 other people, someone who's operating the crane arm, someone who's operating the remote head, and someone who's pulling focus. And I know this because a lot of my friends do that for a living. And there's a lot of conversation that goes on inside that vehicle. And I don't think at that particular moment they were really paying full attention to what was going on. All they were hearing was me saying, oh, I don't have enough air pressure. I don't have enough air pressure. Well, when I got enough air pressure and it did release the brakes and my bus now starts to go forward, they were standing still. They weren't moving. And so now I'm on the walkie-talkie on my button on my chest going, go, 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 because I was about to punch the back of the crane arm and take out their camera. Well, Dean Bailey, who was driving that, was it Dean or Alan Padelford? It was Alan Padelford, finally looked in his mirror, saw it was I'm coming toward him. He got on it just in time and started leading me down the road. And I had told him 60 miles per hour, and he was perfect. Got up to 60 miles per hour. I'm coming down the road and I see those 2 cones off on my left-hand side. I'm like, oh, that's right, frickin' camera guy. And I'm reaching down trying to find the 2 switches. I felt them and I flicked them up. And now I'm approaching the 2 vehicles and I go to hit the brake to slide the lock up the rear tire so I can start to slide the bus sideways. And it starts to slide and I'm just about to hit the charger, and I stomp on the switch behind my accelerator to activate the cannons. And it just kind of goes boom. Not much more of a lift than I felt when the one cannon fired by itself. And I slammed so hard into the back of that charger, and it flipped the bus onto its side, slid it off the road and kind of rolled up onto its rooftop, and then came back down on its side. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. That was it? Out of those 3 cannons, that's all we got was that? I was more than pissed off. I was angry that's all that happened. That's all we got. It was almost embarrassing to crawl out of that bus, and that's all it was, just flopped onto its rooftop. Well, when I got out and I walked around the undercarriage of the bus, I looked up and there were still 2 cannon poles in the belly of the bus. 2 cannon poles that had not fired. And I could not figure out, why is that when they're all tied in together to one switch? How is it possible that did not fire, all 3 cannons? And Matt Sweeney walked up and he was scratching his head. And I go, Matt, I hit the button. And he goes, oh, I know. Look at the divot in the ground. And there was this about 5-inch deep divot where that pole had slammed in the ground. And then where it drug, it carved looked like a big fish hook mark. And it just carved that asphalt. And so there was no denying that I had fired. And also one of the poles was now out of the belly of the bus. It was laying on the side of the road. But we couldn't figure out why the others did not fire. So Matt Sweeney says, you know what? Those are still very dangerous because they each got 50,000 PSI. So let's bleed them out. So a couple of the special effects men climbed up on top. They brought these ladders in and they climb up on top and they start bleeding out the air pressure. I mean, it was so loud, just so loud you can barely even talk. Well, as they were bleeding out the air pressure, all of a sudden, one of those cannons fires and just goes boom and goes sailing through the sky about 300 yards and sticks into the side of this mountain. Actually went right in the path where the helicopter had been flying. And everyone like freaks out. Like we were like, moving away, rushing away from the bus. Like, oh my God. And then the second one fires, same thing. Boom! It fires and sails through the air and sticks into the mountain. And Matt Sweeney goes, I know what the problem was. I know what was wrong. And I'm like, I don't know how this man, how his brain works. I know he's a genius, but what the heck was, and he goes, we didn't have enough bungee cord. I'm like, you didn't have enough bungee cord. What the heck are you talking about? Well, it turns out because Universal wanted to know why the stunt was not a success. What happened? What went wrong? Was it Corey's fault? What went wrong? And it was Matt Sweeney who got on the phone with them and said, yeah, gentlemen, well, what happened was we didn't have enough bungee cord. And they said, well, what would it have cost to have had enough bungee cord? Oh, about $7.50. So they're like, you're kidding me. He's like, nope, just needed to have more bungee cord. And they said, well, is there any way we could get enough bungee cord and we could do this again? Because Justin Lin, the director, really wants that bus to roll, a couple of times, not just flop onto its side. It was very anticlimactic for the opening of the movie. So Sweeney says, absolutely yes. So when Matt explained to me what had happened, I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. What had happened was two different gentlemen had wrapped the bungee cord to pull open the ball valves. One guy had used 1/2-inch bungee and wrapped it about 3 or 4 times. The other guy was using 3/4-inch bungee and wrapped it like 8 times. So the bungee wasn't the same tension. It didn't have the same pull on the other two. So, they had the 1/2-inch bungee. It wasn't enough to pull because the air pressure was so much pushing up against the ball valve that the ball valve could not roll open until like when they were bleeding out the tanks, and it reduced the amount of PSI pushing up against the ball valve. It then was enabled that bungee cord to pull it open. So no one could have thought about this ahead of time. It was just one of those things that we learned from doing that. Okay, the way to fix it is make sure we got enough bungee cord to roll those ball valves open because there's so much pressure pushing against them. They don't want to move. So we knew how to fix it. But now, how are you going to fix this bus that rolled onto its side and up onto its rooftop, and 3/4 of the bus is crushed? I mean, the metal's dented and smashed and scraped, and the glass windows are busted out. And this guy who was in charge of all of the picture vehicles for all of the Fast and Furious movies, Dennis Mccarthy, is just amazing. I mean, amazing, and all uppercasing, like a 34 font, bold letters, amazing. This man went and got another prison bus from the Lompoc Penitentiary and brought it down, and his fabricators stripped every little piece off the bus that I had rolled that was damaged and traded it with the bus that was not damaged. And when I saw them start to do this, I was very pessimistic. I said, there's no way. I mean, because that bus looked like a loaf of bread that somebody had stepped on. There's no way. And they did. They worked on this thing around the clock. They brought in lights and worked at night. And the next morning when I saw, I was like, oh my God, they're really going to accomplish this. And we're supposed to do this in another day. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're really going to do this. That's when I went to Matt Sweeney. I said, Matt, I've got a request, buddy. I said, look at this. And I showed him the pod that had hit one rock when it rolled onto its rooftop, and it kind of bent this one piece of metal in, one of the tubing, the 2-inch 120 gauge DOM tubing, which is very strong. It dented it. And I thought to myself, because the structure of the bus was not as strong as we thought it would be. It's not like a school bus, which is very, very strong, the structure of a school bus. But these, Greyhound buses, those big prison buses like that are aluminum, and there's not much strength to the outer shell. So I was concerned about that it was going to crush in on, and take out this pod that I was in. And so I requested that they would take more of that 2-inch 120 gauge DOM tubing and make other hoops above my head. I said, give me 2 more halos here, 2 more behind me, and 2 more at the very back. We added another 1,700 feet of tubing. So basically we built a secondary cage. I now had kind of a crumple zone. The rooftop of the bus was going to absorb a little bit. Then it was going to get to the secondary cage, and that was going to absorb a lot of the impact before it would get down into the pod where I was going to be seated. So that made me feel a little bit braver. Now knowing what was going to happen with what went wrong and what was going to happen with the cannons firing correctly this time, having a sense of what it felt like the first time going down there. And I'm like, okay, I'm charged up. I'm feeling confident. I show up that morning and it was not foggy and ominous and cold. It was a crisp, sunny day. And everybody kind of had that extra pep in their step. Everyone had kind of a great attitude and like, we're going to get this today, Corey, and communicating with me and smiles and handshakes and pats on the back and let's get it today, Corey. I got charged up. It was a completely different feeling that day. And then Justin Lin came up to me, the director, and he goes, Corey, I looked at the footage, and when you slammed into the back of the Charger, I know I asked you to do that, and that's what causes the bus to flip over, but it hit it so hard. I mean, I don't know that the audience would believe that Paul Walker would have survived. So could you just flip over the top of it and not, just kind of flip over the top of the Charger and not hit it? And I said, oh, sure, Justin, it's just like a feather. I'll just flip it right over the top. I was being a little sarcastic because I could be that way, and especially when I'm nervous. And he said, okay, great. And he walked off like, oh, that's just as simple. You can just, let me take this 42,000 pound prison bus and just flip it in the air and flip it right over the top of the Charger. Well, it's exactly what happened. And it was so much, I have to be honest, there was so much luck involved in that, because now, here we go on take 2 and I come flying down that road and I had a feel of what this big slab of Jello was going to feel like steering it. And I had them move the camera switches for me into a better spot that I could visually see them. And I nailed those, flipped those on. Everything's good. I'm feeling confident. I come in there and hit the brake to lock up the rear tires. The bus starts to skid sideways. And I see that I'm maybe a car length and a half from crashing into the back of that Charger. And I said, you know what? Right about now seems like a good time. And I hit that button and boom! That bus flipped in the air, and I was like, holy smokes. And it came down and hit, and just on the right edge, and caught an edge, and flipped again, and caught an edge, and flipped again. And I could hear those other pipes from the secondary cage that we had installed. I could hear those pieces of metal, that tubing, snapping and crushing, and my surroundings were getting tighter and tighter. You could just feel like being inside of a big room, and then a medium-sized room, and then a small room, and then wow. And I'm like, I can't get any lower in my seat. And it rolled, and at that point I thought to myself, just please stop rolling. And it comes to a stop upside down and just settles. And I'm like, oh my God. And I hit my lap belts, and I pull out my neck collar, and I slide out of this bus, and the adrenaline was just shooting through my veins. I'm like, I did it. Oh my God. And I was approached by my stunt safety team, Oakley Lehman, and Mike Gunther came in, and Kyle Woods, and they were big hugs and handshakes. And because everyone was so freaking nervous. They're like, wow, did Corey just get killed? Did we just watch someone just get killed during a stunt? It was that violent. It was that crazy. And you know what? I can't even put into words how proud I am to have accomplished that stunt, and to have received my 3rd TAURUS World Stunt Award for Best Vehicular Stunt. And it was, I have to thank Mike Gunther for having the confidence in me to do that, to give me that job, that opportunity, because that was really, fulfilling a dream that I had, and so proud of that stunt. And I'm so glad I got a chance to share it with you. And I hope that if you enjoyed, again, listening to stunt stories, that you will consider subscribing and helping me promote this podcast by telling all your friends. That'd be greatly appreciated. Thanks so much, and have a great day.